Welcome to this explainer. I mean, just take a quick look at the smartphone in your pocket or the laptop sitting on your desk right now. You might think this kind of absolute market dominance was always the grand plan, right? Well, today we're diving into the incredibly volatile, high-stakes corporate journey of Apple to see how this company, this absolute juggernaut, almost didn't exist at all.
So we've got to start with a massive question. How exactly does a $30,000 piece of makeshift garage tech turn into a $3 trillion global empire? It is a staggering transformation. We're looking at a company that evolved from a counterculture, almost anti-establishment hobby, straight into the undeniable behemoth of modern technology.
To really understand how that happened, we need to jump back in time. Section 1. The Garage Revolution.
Picture the late 60s and 70s. The baby boomers were out there seeking new ideas, and tech was moving at an absolutely breakneck speed. We went from the invention of the microchip in '69 straight to the very first personal computer in '74. Now, honestly, that first PC was basically just a box with some flashing lights on it. But those flashing lights were more than enough to hook a guy named Steve Wozniak, and by 1975, his obsession led directly to the very first Apple computers.
And here is where we see the absolute secret sauce of this early company. The perfect character foil. On one side, you've got the engineer, Steve Wozniak. He's this introverted wizard figuring out how to combine chips, make them multitask, and actually output colored graphics. On the flip side, you have the marketer, Steve Jobs. Jobs was the visionary who realized that, hey, a messy pile of wires is completely terrifying to a normal, everyday person. He knew technology desperately needed a friendly, personal connection with the user, all wrapped up in a sleek casing.
Now, their very first real product together, the Apple I, well, it wasn't exactly user-friendly just yet. It was essentially a naked circuit board that ran simple calculations. You literally had to supply your own keyboard and monitor, but selling 50 of them brought in a modest $30,000. It was a pretty humble beginning, for sure, but for Steve Jobs, it was absolute proof of concept. People really did want personal computers.
But get ready for some serious financial whiplash. By 1977, they released the Apple II, and because it was finally a fully packaged, consumer-friendly computer that you could just plug in and use, sales absolutely exploded. The company skyrocketed to a mind-blowing $2 billion valuation. When Apple went public in 1980, that single day of stock trading created 300 millionaires. They had officially made it.
But, every corporate hero's journey has its dark age. Section 2. The Fall of Apple. Turns out, massive success brings massive bureaucracy. Their next run of computers, like the Apple III and the Lisa, were wildly expensive and basically had zero apps. The internal fighting got so incredibly toxic that Jobs has actually kicked off his own project. This sparked a legendary, brutal clash between Jobs and the new CEO, John Sculley, a former Pepsi executive who frankly cared a lot more about profit margins than pushing technological boundaries. The staggering result of all this drama? Both Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak were pushed entirely out of the very company they founded.
So, without its visionaries, Apple spent the next decade just bleeding cash. They were pumping out these incredibly expensive, kind of boring computers. Meanwhile, Bill Gates and Microsoft are out there taking over the world. Sure, Microsoft's computers might have been boring too, but they were significantly cheaper and they got the job done. In the 90s, affordable functionality simply crushed expensive aesthetics. Apple's market share just completely plummeted, leaving the company literally weeks away from total bankruptcy.
Desperate times call for desperate measures, right? Section 3. The prodigal founder returns.
By 1996, Apple's leadership realized they desperately needed that missing spark back. So they bought Jobs' new venture Next for $400 million just to get him in the building. And Jobs immediately executed this brutal but absolutely brilliant turnaround plan. Step 1, he trashes 70% of Apple's ongoing projects. Just gone. Step 2, he makes the incredibly tough call to fire 3,000 people. Step 3, he buys up all these companies making Apple clones. Why do all this? So he could laser focus every single ounce of brain power left in the company on Step 4, building one perfect, industry-shifting computer.
And that machine? That was the iMac, released in 1998. It was a massive, immediate success, selling 800,000 units in just 5 months. It was totally revolutionary because it used USB ports, it was internet-ready right out of the box, and most importantly, in a world full of boring beige boxes, this translucent, colorful iMac actually looked cool. Aesthetics were a selling point all over again. It brought back Apple's marketable spark and laid the foundation for a totally new ecosystem.
Which perfectly tees up Section 4, the mobile revolution. Entering the 2000s, Jobs asked this incredibly simple yet world-changing question. Why sit at a desk when you can take your digital life outside? The answer, of course, was the iPod. Paired up with the iTunes Store, it wasn't just a wildly successful music player that sold 100 million units. It was the very beginning of Apple's inescapable ecosystem lock-in. Once you bought your digital music from Apple, you stayed with Apple. It was an absolute revelation that pulled them entirely out of their slump and rocketed their valuation back up to a healthy $72 billion. But honestly, the iPod was just a warm-up act. Section 5, the iPhone changes everything. The precise moment that shifted Apple from a prominent computer company to a global empire happened on a stage in 2007. Steve Jobs walks out and uses this brilliant psychological trick. He tells the audience they are introducing 3 revolutionary products: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device. He just kept repeating it until the crowd finally realized he wasn't holding 3 devices, he was holding one, the iPhone. It reinvented the industry so completely that they actually went ahead and officially dropped the word computer from Apple's corporate name. Now, to handle the practically infinite possibilities of a touchscreen device, they launched the App Store. In its very first month, 60 million applications were downloaded. 60 million! This wasn't just a phone anymore, it was an entire digital economy living right in the palm of your hand, built by outside developers who are now making Apple exponentially richer day by day.
And that sets the stage for Section 6, the trillion-dollar future.
Suddenly, Apple is releasing iPads and building this incredibly sticky ecosystem with iMessage and iCloud. They looked completely unstoppable. But then, tragedy strikes. Steve Jobs passes away in 2011. And this leaves the tech world, the stock market, and everyday consumers in an absolute panic, asking one massive question: what happens when the visionary leaves? Could the new CEO, Tim Cook, actually keep the innovation alive without the man who essentially built the company twice?
Well, as it turns out, Cook didn't just keep it alive. He put the pedal to the metal. We got the iPhone 4S with Siri and a completely new product category with the Apple Watch in 2014. By 2016, Apple hit 1 billion active devices worldwide. And in 2020, Cook solved a massive strategic vulnerability by breaking up with outside chip makers entirely. Apple moved all their processor manufacturing in-house with the M1 chip, giving them total, unprecedented control over the very brains of their computers.
All that relentless iteration, a tightly locked ecosystem, and some masterful supply chain management, it brought us directly to the devices you use every single day. And it pushed Apple to an almost incomprehensible milestone, a $3 trillion valuation at its peak. I mean, just think about that. From a $30,000 circuit board in a dusty garage to a $3 trillion empire. Which leaves us looking squarely toward the horizon. Apple is now actively pivoting away from traditional screens and pushing towards spatial computing with the Apple Vision Pro. So I leave you with this final thought today. As they push us further and further into virtual reality, will this brand new frontier take this trillion-dollar empire even higher, or are we finally reaching the limit of how much tech we actually want in